about anything else.
We don't want to know.
We're dedicated, yes,
To our favorite shows.
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hypnotoad.
Scary dog!
Blurson at Blursball.
Futurama.
Good evening. You are listening to a Radulich and Broadcasting premiere podcast TV party tonight. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich, but you can call me Wheezy. And tonight, our favorite show is The Big Show. Brought to you by the good people at Z&M Industrial Films, North Rock 6, WWE Studios, and Netflix. And whenever there's wrestling about and the podsman can't be found, one hero steps into the light. He's totally 80s. Pat Mullin, how are you, sir?
My name is Pat Mullin. We may call you Wheezy, but don't call me George.
Oh, let's move on up. So, I didn't even know this was a thing. How did you find out about this before it just popped up on Netflix? Because you were like all over this right before it debuted.
I don't even remember, to be honest. I want to say somebody messaged me and was like, hey, is this a thing? And I was like, I don't know, I guess. And then, like, the idea of the Big Show, like, what, I forget what it was. And then they dropped the trailer, like, maybe a month or two before the show came out. And I was like, oh my God, this is a real thing.
It screams TGI Fridays, right? Not the restaurant. But, you know, the...
What we did on Friday night in the 80s and 90s. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it totally screams like the ABC Friday sitcom lineup. It is, like, if you didn't know it was 2019 and you just kind of ran this show in between Family Matters and Full House, you would totally think this was a show from that era.
No, I think I told you, too, when we were talking about this. I was like, this is just like when George Foreman had a sitcom, and you were like, what?
Yeah, I was not aware he had a sitcom. So, for those who, I don't know how you would find this podcast and not know who The Big Show is, considering how much wrestling content we do, but if you're one of those few people who only listens to the TV reviews and has no idea about wrestling, The Big Show, whose real name is Paul White, has been wrestling since the mid-90s. He started off in World Championship Wrestling, which was the competitor to the WWF at the time, owned by Ted Turner, who aired their programming on TBS and then eventually TNT. When the Monday Night Wars began in earnest, they had this guy who was very tall, somewhere in the 7-foot area, who I think was a former basketball player, and he was looking for a second career, and I think somebody, as what happens with a lot of wrestlers, somebody saw him in a gym and was like, you need to be in wrestling, you big man, you. So he went down to he got invited down to the power plant. I think like Hulk Hogan took care of him early on. He worked out at the power plant and immediately got pushed on their Monday Night Wrestling show, Nitro. I think like in his debut, he won the title. Am I right? Am I up to date so far?
In his first match at Halloween Havoc, 1995.
So, he was wrestling as the Giant, and I think initially they tried to sell him as the son of Andre the Giant, but then slowly but surely realized that's not classy, that's in poor taste, and stopped doing it. And he ran around with Kevin Sullivan's motley group, the Dungeon of Doom, for a while, and in 96, when the NWO became a thing, he first he feuded with them, then he joined them, then he was out of the group, then he was in the group, then he was out of blah, 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 blah. And eventually, in 1999, he showed up in the WWF in a cage match between Steve Austin and Vince McMahon, where he popped up through the ring, like you do, threw Steve Austin into the cage wall came flying off, and Steve Austin went, whee! And jumped to his victory, leaving Paul White in the ring looking rather befuddled. And then after that, he became known as The Big Show. Many, many years later, he has since semi-retired from wrestling, and the show is sort of his fictionalized family life after wrestling. So the premise is that he has a daughter from a first marriage whose mother gets sent to Brussels for work, and she opts to go live with her father, who's now off the road and at home and trying to figure out life after wrestling. And so she moves in with him, his two new daughters with his second wife, and the show goes from there. So, Pat, right off the bat, you a big fan of... let's talk a little bit about just the Big Show himself. I laid out his career in short order as best I could. What did you think of the Big Show from Halloween Havoc to getting jobbed out by Drew McIntyre?
He is a big guy, but he's not a giant. And I think that always worked against him. Because, we grew up in the era of Andre the Giant, who, right, even though size-wise, maybe they were the same height, they may have weighed the same at a certain amount of time. But you look at Andre, and Andre was a giant. He had acromegaly that was never fixed. He had the giant head, the giant hands, the giant feet, the extra teeth, all that stuff. He really was a giant. Paul White was a very, very large man who had acromegaly, but had the surgery that they didn't have available to Andre at the time to fix that pituitary issue. And so he grew and became a big man, but was never a giant. And I think that always hurt his career because he was always booked as a lesser giant. And I don't think he ever had the career he probably could have had he come along a little bit before this. And that's a shame.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think they booked him as a guy, and the only time he ever felt like he ever wrestled his size was when he wrestled against other big guys. I think most famously him and Brock Lesnar collapsed a ring. And so I think, over the course of his career, depending on who he works with, he either ends up working smaller with the smaller guys, or he works bigger, but he's working with a guy comparable to his size. Andre, by comparison, just so people understand, was always booked like a spectacle. He was wrestling three guys at the same time and beating every one of them. I think what him and John Studd actually had like a real serious animosity between them, because both of them wanted to be giants in wrestling, and there could be only one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Andre didn't like John Studd too much. And the thing was, because, again, John Studd wanted to be a giant, Andre was a giant, and that was that. Andre was the giant. So you didn't do things that Andre, you didn't step on his toes. And the one thing John Studd would do that Andre specifically told him, don't do that, was John Studd would step over the top rope to get into the ring.
Right.
Which was what Andre did. And, again, to enhance that giant persona. But John Studd would do it, and then Andre would get mad, and Andre would beat the hell out of him.
So, the Big Show, as we've been talking, did he have opportunities? Sure. He was in big matches. He had the world title at least once. He may have had it more times than that when they had two of them, and they treated the second one like it was the Intercontinental title. He was always, when he was around, like a main feature on TV in some form or another. He had some he had feuds with The Undertaker, Brock Lesnar, Triple H, just to name a few. But he had a tag team with The Miz that was that people enjoyed. He had a tag team with Chris Jericho that people enjoyed. And he's definitely been in some memorable moments, but just to put a bow on this, he never really had, I think, he had some WrestleMania matches where he would wrestle celebrities. Like he did the Akibono match, he did the Floyd Mayweather match, and I think he had lost so many of those in a row. They finally gave him a win at WrestleMania as for he's a jolly good fellow. Here's your lifetime achievement win. But yeah, he had a good, solid, good hand career, and your mileage may vary with the Big Show. I think early on, I liked the potential of what they could do with him in the WWE, but I would say as he got on in years, I was less interested because they never really let him kill anyone. Like for a while there, he was just punching people, and that was supposed to be his big destructive thing, the power of the punch. But the last couple of years of the Big Show's career, he never really did anything for me. Pat, give me the final word here on the Big Show, and we'll transition to this actual Big Show.
Had a good career. I don't want to say he didn't, and he's lasted for close to 30 years as a feature act, but he didn't have the career he probably could have.
No. And God bless him, he tried. I mean, I think I remember shortly after one of the WrestleManias, I want to say WrestleMania 2000, he came out on Raw the next night and did like Fat Bastard. Like, God bless him, he tried. He tried to be something more than just a big oaf, and not a lot of it worked, but some of it was charming. And I want to stick on that word there, charming, because while I think the Big Show tried to stretch and tried to, reach for a different identity other than lumbering giant, he struggled with it in the WWE, but here, like, he has surprising charisma. Like, I think you and I were both shocked with how good he actually is in this. And he's playing an exaggerated version of himself, and he's definitely leaning into Big Dumb Dad. But this show kind of rises and falls and rests entirely on his ability to be charismatic on camera and work well with these children, these three gals. And I think he largely succeeds.
I was really surprised at how good he was. And it's not a situation where I'm knocking him, because he's done comedic things in the past. Like you talked about him doing the Fat Bastard impersonation, and when he would do his Hulk Hogan impersonation, things like that. He can be funny, but there's also kind of an inherent warmth about this big family man. And it's, we grew up in the era of sitcoms where the dad was usually a bumbling oaf of some kind in many instances. And he takes it to another level because of his size and everything. But he's also a personality that he gets to hone and charm you with in this show, which is largely tailored around him and what his strengths are. And when they play to his strengths, I think the show is, I'm not going to call it mind-blowing or anything like that, but I think it's better than your average TGIF fare, is probably the way I'm looking to describe it.
Many of the situation comedies that I've watched over the years and recently kind of fall into two categories. Cringeworthy, not cringeworthy. I talked about, on a recent podcast, I don't know if it was a Gretzko or something else, I talked about the Modern Family finale. And, I've been watching Modern Family since it started. You got another one of those shows my wife insisted we watch together, and then she stopped watching shortly thereafter, and I got stuck with it for a decade. But, like you do. But, I talked about how Modern Family, while it has won all these Emmys, and it's this highly touted show, people just talk about, it was parodied on Family Guy because, on a couple of different occasions, because people just fall all over themselves talking about how well Family Guy is written and performed. And I found the show very cringy at times. Like, I found myself, like, having to fast forward through certain situations because it was so over-the-top stupid. And it was one of those where, like, you wouldn't have a show if people just took 2 seconds to talk to one another. And the other part of it is nobody acts this way. Like, it's so over-the-top and so overblown that you start, you're basically just watching, like, nonsense television instead of something relatable. Oddly enough, the Big Show falls into the not cringy category. Like, there were definitely some personality traits turned up to 10, but I think you need that for an entertaining show. But I would say, like we talked about this with Fuller House and some of the other things, some of the other shows we've discussed in the past, how there's always like a character or two that you just hate. You know, like there's just somebody like you just root for bad things to happen to, you know, or like they're like the star, and you're like, why am I supposed to root for you? And they, you know, and it's like the show is largely supported by the cast around them because the star sucks so bad. And that's not the case here. Like, I loved all the girls. I loved the wife. Like, the wife's not a know-it-all shithead shrew like most women are written on television, where she's good morning, perfect. Another Family Guy bit. She's not written as an angel from heaven. The children are precocious, but not overbearing. And the Big Show, I think, is more, you know, here's a guy who lived on the road for a few decades. He's trying to find his way in this family, and it's not the most perfect fit, and that's where the drama and the comedy is, not in he's a big dumb dumbbell. And that's what I really loved about it and got kind of passionate about is, wow, this is actually like written really well for a situation, you know, single camera situation comedy on Netflix, where you have all likable characters, all likable lead characters, in a situation where I don't hate the characterizations of any one person here. It's actually very, very enjoyable.
There's usually one or more of those characters in a show, even if we love the show, that we just are like, why are you here? I really just enjoy none of what you do. Please go away.
Didn't we, like, hate what's-his-face in Fuller House? I mean, Fernando. Yeah, we hated Fernando in the beginning, and he grew on us as they gave him more, and they made him less ridiculous.
Yeah, well, they retooled him. That's, to use an industry word there. They retooled him pretty heavily to make him less hateable. So it clearly wasn't just us who hated him, as massive changes came to that character.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, like, the easy one to single out that, like, I would normally hate would be the daughter JJ, the youngest daughter, who is a conniver and a schemer and, you know, very precocious.
So, two questions on her real quick. One, did you see wedding bells for her and Max in your head? Two, did you get the sense that she's basically like Devil Max?
I didn't see wedding bells from her and Max because I think Max is smart enough to understand what she is. And I'm also still not positive Max actually likes girls.
Fair enough.
And two, she absolutely is Devil Max. But Juliet Donenfeld, who plays her, or Donenfeld, excuse me, is so good.
Yeah.
She's so good in that role. I was so surprised by how much I liked this kid. And I just couldn't believe how excellent she is. Because, again, looking at all the characters there, she would normally be the one I would hate because everything with her would feel forced and like you're supposed to just automatically accept it. But she plays the role so well. And a lot of times it's her plot is usually the B plot of the show versus Big Show carrying the A plot. And yeah, I do still think he's the strongest part of the show. And when it's on him, he carries it really well. But if you're going to have that B plot to offset it, JJ's really proven to me that she's capable of dealing it.
She has so much charisma, and she's so fun. And, you know, we talked about, for those who haven't listened to our Fuller House reviews, you know, we talked about how Max, who I believe is the middle child on Fuller House, he's precocious, he's very, very smart, but he's like Danny Jr. He's kind of a fop. You know, he's very metrosexual, is his presentation. Where you have, you know, JJ, who has the same level of precociousness and intelligence, but she's kind of a con artist. You know, she's looking to get over. But other than that, she also has like a zest for life that I don't think Max has. You know, like, Max can be very reserved, and, you know, they really sometimes, like, it took us a while to get into him, too. as a character because they made him so standoffish at times, whereas like my favorite parts of this show are sometimes the stuff they do with JJ, and not like the I'm gonna hack into this or that thing, like that I just kind of roll my eyes at, but like when she's DJing the party and she's just like just throwing candy back, I think one line she has where she's like, I gotta quit this candy habit. I have so many cavities. I actually died laughing. I thought that was really funny. But she's not, like, I don't want to give the impression that they write her as kind of a villainous character. She's sweet. She has a heart. She's very much a little kid. She's
all about the side hustle.
Yeah. She's just like, she reads the room very well and sees what she can get away with, because she knows 9 out of 10 times she's naturally the smartest person in the room. So yeah, I got a kick out of her. Let's talk a little bit more about the Big Show and how, and then let's talk about some of the other characters here. One of the things that I really liked about the show, and I kind of personally related to, is, as a father, and Jesse and I talked about this on the previous podcast. Sometimes it's hard to know like where you fit in with your own family. Are you just the paycheck? Are you the breadwinner? Do you have, what is your influence? What is your role? And believe it or not, it might sound strange to people, but I think a lot of dads sometimes struggle with that, because the woman, the wife, the mother tends to want to run everything, It's a characterization, and it's kind of true in many instances where they're with the kids so much for one reason or another, they tend to take over everything. And so where does that leave the dad? And I think the show deals with it in a very light way, very light touch, on the idea of I'm here, I'm present, I'm off the road, how do I fit in here? What do I do? What is my relationship to these girls, to my wife, to this family?
And with a daughter who has not lived with him coming
right.
in to live with him now.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about that. But so that I really related to that aspect of the show, and there's a lot of episodes where, Big Show tries in earnest to help one of his daughters, and he kind of fumbles it because he doesn't know. He's been a person whose success was largely built on his physical gifts, and now he has to use other parts of his personality and his brain, and it's not coming as naturally to him as he would like.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily that he's struggling with what he should do or could do. It's more a case of, I'm going to do this, and if it's a mistake, I'm going to have to overcome it, which I think is a fresher take on the dad being a complete bumbling idiot and making a huge mistake and then trying to hide it and going through all these shenanigans and hijinks that, whether it's Fred Flintstone or, Graham on Just the 10 of Us or whatever, bumbling idiot father, if you'd like to throw in there.
Phil on Modern Family.
Okay, sure. We'll go with that. But it's just they really don't write him as an idiot.
Right.
He still has a heart of gold. He's still not perfect. He's still making mistakes, but it's more a case of, okay, that was a mistake. I need to fix this, rather than, let's hide it from the wife and let's cover it up by bribing the kids with candy or doing whatever. And, it stayed away from the stuff that we've lather, rinse, repeated before and over again, and really only works anymore when you have a very special level of writing and acting combined to get through it. This doesn't have that old take on it. It's a little bit more real, which is a funny thing to say considering the subject matter, but it works.
I was surprised how relatable this was, because again, going back to that TGIF framework, a lot of those shows kind of could be cringy at times too, and were very exaggerated, and a lot of stuff was played for laughs. Where this, I had some big belly laughs in this show. Like, I watched it over the course of a day or so, in between things I was doing, and I remember like bursting, out, loudly laughing at certain gags or lines in the show, more so than I thought I would, more so than I did at Fuller House. To believe it or not. Not that I'm putting down Full House now, because we love that too. But I really I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this, and it was largely because, again, using the rubric of situation comedy, 20-minute situation comedy, this is pretty smartly written.
There's a lot they pack in. Like we said, there's usually, in standard writing, an A plot and a B plot to every episode. But they do it in a way that it doesn't seem one end is completely ignoring the other.
Yeah.
It's just a case of how they set it up, which is well done. And again, now they've only been through 8 episodes. Is there a chance that this can drop off and we won't get that same quality later? Of course there is. But from what we've seen, they've been able to do it and do it well without... And part of that, too, is they're not making these plots look like they can't coexist in the same world.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times we'll see that elsewhere.
So Allison Munn plays his wife, and she's a real estate agent, and we'll see in a later episode, one of my favorites, actually, where they do a play on It's a Wonderful Life, where, she supported the Big Show while he was on the road, and she's been largely raising the 2 gals that they had together by themselves, and she's in the new role of having to be the stepmom to Lola, who's the elder child from another marriage. And so she's, now that Big Show's off the road, she's focusing on her real estate career, and she's taking an opportunity to do for herself. And she's also having to transition into having her husband home all the time. And there's a lot of elements where, a lot of legs on the table to where if they're not working, the whole thing kind of collapses. One of them is the chemistry between these two. And I would have sworn they were a real married couple. Like, one, again, she's written really well. She's not a total shrew. She's not a know-it-all. She has her niches, but, she also has, and these are very true mom/woman moments where you're like, nope, done, your problem. She's not... a really good example of what I'm talking about would be, Roseanne. Did you ever watch Roseanne as a kid?
Sadly, yes.
So you know how, basically, Roseanne was always smarter and quicker than everybody else. She always had all the answers. Even when she was dead-ass wrong or utterly classless, they wrote her, they always wrote her, everybody's an idiot around her, and she has all the answers, and she's the master and ruler of the world. And Roseanne is perfect even when she's an asshole. Would you agree with that?
I think, it's probably a good case for that.
Is that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. They don't write Allison Munn that way. She has flaws. She's not perfect, but she's very bright and very fun, and she has great charisma with the Big Show. They have good chemistry together. And, I love the episode of her and Lola where she's desperately trying to win her affection and be close to her and bond with her. And then Lola, of course, being a teenager, has to take it a step too far and be like, let's get tattoos. And it's like, I don't want you to dislike me, but this is a terrible idea and I don't want to do this. And so there's a lot of tension played for laughs in that. But, I really liked Allison Munn as Casey White. I thought she did an excellent job.
I didn't recognize Allison Munn at first, and I was like, where do I know her from? And then it hit me. She was on a show called What I Like About You, I'm dating myself, probably close to 20 years ago already, my God. on the CW with Jenny Garth and Amanda Bynes before she went off the reservation. She played Bynes' best friend on the show, and I always liked her in that. But seeing her in this role as Big Show's wife, immediately there's chemistry between them, which is like really interesting to me because she is such a seasoned actress, and we know that Show has acted before. He's done smaller parts in some big movies and big parts in some smaller movies and things of that nature, but they really just interact very well. They do come off as a really natural married couple. The fact that he's transitioning out of a career while she's picking hers up into a higher gear, or at least attempting to, is a good balance. I like the shift in dynamic we see where she's always known as the Punisher, and now Show is home and taking over. He's in that role. The daughters get excited about it because they feel like he's not going to be capable of doing it versus what their mom is capable of. And just, again, seeing the give and take between them, especially when we get to like my favorite episode later on, the cruise. But she, I think a lot of the reliance is upon her because she's a seasoned actress who's done a lot of TV, has done a lot of sitcom work where she understands the milieu of what she's working in and does it really well.
The danger, I think, in a lot of television shows with married couples is that I feel like sometimes the woman is written as if they fucking hate their husband. And they only are affectionate with them because the script says so. I'm very sensitive to that, and there was none of that in this show, thank God, because I hate it. And again, and it sucks because like you haven't watched Modern Family, so you don't know if I'm right or wrong about this. But I always felt like Claire and Phil, there was moments of affection surrounded by large swaths of it seems like Claire hates Phil.
See, I watched the first couple seasons, and then I just kind of fell out of it, but I see with that relationship, though, I feel like it's both ways.
Okay.
Because Phil will say something like, I love my wife, but she's the worst to give. There's one part where, like, it's like, I don't know if it's Father's Day or his birthday, but, like, she gives him, like, a really awful gift, and he's like, and when they do the breaking the fourth wall thing, when they interview the camera, he's like, personal yogurt maker, robot, and names like 14 things he wanted. And he's like, what? I love my wife, but she sucks at gifts.
Yeah, he's had a few moments on the show, hither and thither, where he just blows up and says, like she's ruining his life, or she sucks the magic out of things, or, another really funny example of this, again, the handful of shows that I draw from for a lot of references. There's a bit in Family Guy where Peter and Lois are going back and forth, and finally Lois like relents to something, and Peter goes, "Yay, you're letting me being myself." So I definitely can relate to. So
it's something everybody can relate to.
But there's none of that here. She's not a bitch, Even when they're on the cruise, and I do think that's a great episode. When they're on the cruise, and she's like, "Look, this is important to me. I have to sell this house. I understand you went above and beyond to be romantic, but this is your work cruise that you jury-rigged romance into is not the thing that's foremost on my mind right now. It's selling this house and getting my business off the ground." And I'm like, that's a very real thing. And shock of all shocks on a podcast such as this, I absolutely related to her and was like, no, you're right. I'm on your side on this one.
Yeah, and we get the reassurance at that point, not only from, that, but Show's friends who are on the cruise all say to him, "You booked your anniversary for this?"
Right. Let's talk about the eldest daughter who's moving from Minnesota to live with him and his new family. And so there's tension in the integrating of her into the family, and she did not have the time to bond with Show as he was in like the height of his career while she was growing up. So there's a lot of that going on. Again, in the This Is Your Life, It's a Wonderful Life episode, which that doesn't go by that name, but that's what I'm going to call it, if Big Show had never come home and had stayed on the road, they show a shot of her, and she's still in Minnesota, and he goes to call her, and she just declines the call. So they spend a little bit of, it's only 8 episodes, the whole season. They spend a little bit of them just trying to figure each other out, and how this is all going to work going forward. There's a lot played for laughs in that, like they lose her luggage, and she was supposed to have a room to herself, but the two sisters don't want to give up their room, or she has to bunk with one of them, and they're both a nightmare to be with for one reason or another. So there's a lot of like, well, this may have been a terrible idea. She's bumping heads with her dad because he's trying to figure out how to raise a teenage girl for the first time, and like any father, fucking it up. So there's a lot of that, and I was very afraid I was going to hate the Lola character. The gal is fine. The actress is fine. She makes funny faces. She has good line delivery. She is believable as an angsty teenage girl, Raylan Caster. I thought this was going to be a deal where Lola, being the outsider coming in, was going to,
be a little more angsty.
That, I thought they were going to give her all the best lines. I thought she was going to outshine. They were going to write her as outshining the rest of the cast, and that this was basically going to be the Lola show. And I was all set to hate her. I really was. I was like, oh, this girl, she's going to be terrible. And it's a shaky first couple of episodes, but once she settles in and they kind of like move on from the transitional stuff, she's great. I enjoy her best stuff is actually with the sisters and how she interacts with them and helps them, especially the middle one. But she does have a fun bit with her father where they talk about their competitiveness, and this was the worst cooking show I've ever seen, by the way. They make like grilled cheese and the
tater tot casserole.
Yes. And so there's fun stuff with her and her dad, like throwing food at each other and being competitive and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, okay. It was a little bonding thing for them. But yeah, I thought the Lola character was actually presented very well. There's great stuff in the episode where Big Show befriends her boyfriend. That's a really funny episode. And again, she drives into the parking lot of Shrill in that episode, but she pulls right out again, and it never crosses that line.
I also can't say that technically the reaction was wrong because her dad co-opted her date. And again, through no fault of his own that the kid is a huge fan, but, he just horns in, oh, I'll give you guys a ride. Yeah, I'll do the escape room with you. Yeah. And, she's trying to, get her Mac on, and it's just not happening because her date, while still enamored with her, is very clearly starstruck at just meeting the Big Show, finding out this girl's dad is the Big Show, and actually getting to hang out with him.
Yeah. And it's a very real thing. If you're a celebrity, you there are some celebrities who are not really in love with the limelight, and they kind of shy away from it, and they do their art, they do the thing that they're passionate about, but then they hide from the world.
Not for nothing, but I have a very good friend who is a terrific girl, and she is a very smart, bubbly, attractive girl. Her dad happens to be a former WWE performer who I was a huge fan of. He's no longer with us. However, if he was, and I wound up going to meet said girl, and all of a sudden he was there, I would have a very hard time not being starstruck and trying to hang out with him.
Can I guess who it was?
I'm pretty sure you know, but go ahead.
Rick Rude.
No, incorrect.
Nah.
I'm pretty sure you know this.
You've probably told me, but come on, I barely get oxygen to the brain these days.
Fair point. Hercules.
Oh, that's right. Hercules Hernandez. You have told me that story, because you've told me about the girl.
Yes.
Yeah, now I remember. It's all coming back to me. Yeah, I could totally see that. You're like, can I see your chains? Sure.
Yeah.
What was it like working with the Warrior? Did you hate him too? Yeah, I could totally see that. So, so tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on Lola.
So, again, Lola, when she comes in, you're expecting her almost to be the combative force through several episodes, possibly even all of them. And more so with Cassie than her dad, because I think that's just the natural reaction where the stepkids don't have any respect for the stepmother or father or whatever. We don't really ever get there, which is interesting. And it kind of shows that the kid is not a bad kid inherently. She's just out of place and really not fitting in and really upset about it. And not even acting out about it, per se. She kind of just gets upset when Show, for lack of a better way to say it, overcompensates as a dad.
Yeah. And
he knows he can't make up for the time lost in that instance, but he's still trying to do it. We get in one of the first big interactions when the gym coach, who is also the hockey coach, gives her a very hard time. Show ends up, asserting himself and putting the guy upside down on the wall and making a big scene, which she really didn't want to happen. She wanted to avoid that and just kind of fly under the radar at this point. Unfortunately, that's no longer an option. So you get that part, and she's upset with him. She texts the mom kind of wanting to, and the mom makes the offer, you can come to Brussels with me. And then later on, she kind of recants when she gets along a little bit better with Show and her sisters. And she doesn't necessarily super get along with or not get along with Cass at the beginning. But Cassie kind of really tries to bridge that gap and wants to take her shopping and, get all that stuff going. And they become kind of more confidant-esque than parent-child, which is going to be an interesting dynamic as the show goes on, because Cassie is still the parent dynamic to two of the three children. And it's very clear as the show goes on that Lola definitely has an influence on Mandy and JJ.
Yeah. Lily Brooks O'Brien as Mandy. So I was prepared to hate this character too. And I think her initial introduction is probably the worst part of the show. So, to explain as best I can. Initially, they want... It's a 3-bedroom house, near as I can tell. And they're going to have Mandy give up her room so that the elder child, who is transitioning and trying to find her way, can have her own space. Which makes sense. So Mandy is going to bunk with JJ. Mandy doesn't want to give up her room, so she decides she's going to do a sit-in in her room. And this is what the show starts off a little shaky, because this is like the big plot of the first episode. And I think it actually carries into the second episode, if I recall. She basically is like, the old chain yourself to the tree or to the construction vehicle thing. She's just sitting in her room, and she refuses to leave and give it up. And the parents just don't pick her up by her hair and toss her into the other room. They're like, oh no, Mandy, who's a super liberal, she's a fan of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and AOC, we're utterly helpless against this child. Just let her get away with it. And then, I guess she starts live streaming it at some point. So she invites all these other kids to now, a la the, Occupy Wall Street. She has a bunch of kids in the room with her going, hell no, we won't go, until the parents decide, okay, you can keep your room. Which they did anyway, well before all of that. It doesn't work out because apparently JJ is a nightmare to bunk with for one reason or another. And so, this is part of what leads to Lola wanting to leave is, she can't get the room by herself. She can't sleep with JJ. She doesn't have any luggage. What is a Lola to do? So back to Mandy. This goes on for like 2 episodes, and the parents just let it happen. And at one point I was asking myself, where are these kids' parents? How are they letting this happen? These kids just like never leave. And then finally, I think they come to some sort of resolution. You can fill in the details if you want. And then like, oh, okay. And then the big joke is, okay, show, yell at everybody and tell them to go. And so Big Show's out, and everyone scatters like mice. And I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. She gets better after that, but this was not a good start.
It's not. But I think at least what they got right was when they acknowledged, like, yeah, this character idolizes Ruth Ginsburg and AOC and Leslie Knope, that she's an idiot kid. So we get why she's misled and crazy and insane when it comes to these things, and where she gets her dogged persistence no matter how stupid the issue is. So I think it's almost more tolerable because they're parodying that. Like, whereas the character of Leslie Knope, for example, if you've watched Parks and Rec, horrid character. Really just awful. So what they do is they take this girl who is, I think at the time she's either like 12 or 13 in the show, and at a time where you're really dumb but think you're not, and just really exploit that by drawing these comparisons. Yeah. So I think because of how they acknowledge it, it makes it much more tolerable.
Like I said, she does, and you're absolutely right, but she does get better. The bulk of what she does, her character is running for student body president of some kind, and there's a joke in there about, her opponent is a small black fellow named Taylor Swift, and there's a running gag about that. And again, I thought this was going to be too pitchy. this plot that carries over multiple episodes, but I actually thought they handled it well, because there's a lot of, don't sell yourself out for somebody else. Don't subjugate your personality and your beliefs because you want attention from someone. So they deal a lot with that. There's a great party episode where the kids are all having arguments about straws, and they're all trying to out-liberal one another, which I thought was adorable. They start out, and I think he ends up running. God, what was the reason he gave for running initially? Because she started out running unopposed.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't pay a ton of attention to the platforms of these two children.
It was something like, my mom says I'd be good at this, or something like that. It was like really stupid.
That adds up.
I know, she tries to convince him to drop out of the race at one point, and he comes up with he unwittingly outwits her and ends up staying in the race. And then for a while they're secretly together, but they're still running, and they just decide they're not going to compete with one another. But then he comes up with an idea that's so stupid she can't help herself, and they break up. Shit like that. I thought all that was kind of handled well, and I think they toned her down after the second episode enough to where she becomes tolerable. The other two gals, everybody else in the cast, I actually really like, and she's just tolerable. I don't hate her because they toned her down a lot, but she dangerously close to being the worst character on this show.
Yeah, I think there's one character I probably dislike a little bit more than her, but I don't outright dislike any of them.
Right. Anything more about Mandy?
Nope.
All right. So we have a recurring guest on the show, Jaleel White, who people might remember as Urkel. He plays a personal trainer. There's a lot of sight gags with him in the show. He's kind of shows buddy in the program. You know, he's somebody to share dialogue with. Later on, he's sort of the impetus for show deciding for a brief moment in time he's going to go back to the WWE. I thought he did. I mean, he's there to be comic relief, and I thought he did a decent job at that.
I feel like, you know, he's done a lot to try to downplay being Urkel, and it's been hard for him to break out of that. In this, I get it. He doesn't really have any Urkel vibes. I mean, he's supposed to be like the sounding board, like you said, for show, and he kind of is. But when they actually rely on him to carry a gag, I just don't think it's very funny.
Yeah.
I think they would have been better off having him serve as more of almost type of a straight man type person to react to show getting a little bit over the edge on stuff. But instead, he's kind of just this idiot that owns the local gym that show works out at, and as a result, show puts up with him and does favors for him. And he's probably, if there is a weak link on the show, it's him, just for how he's written.
So that wraps up the main cast. I mean, there's people who kind of show up here and there. They have a couple of celebrity appearances. Tan France from, I think, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy shows up in one episode. There's the Cruise episode. Big Show does one of the WWE's fan cruises. And Mick Foley, Mark Henry, and Rikishi all show up.
Please make Mark Henry a recurring character.
We talked about this offline, and I agreed with you. I thought Mark Henry was hilarious, and he has always had a natural charisma. But did you watch Holy Foley?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of it?
It bored me to tears.
Yeah, I get that. But I always thought Mick Foley was an affable, fun character to follow, and I think if he had been given an actual sitcom that played off of his family, his weird fucking family, I think he would have been as good or better than this one. So I enjoyed Mick Foley too, but when I said that to you, you were not as enthusiastic.
No, but I in hindsight, I definitely see the argument more for him in the show role than in the role he played in this as like a second fiddle. I definitely think he probably, when he was really interested in doing fun things like 99, 2000 era, he probably could have like held up a show like this and it would have been marginally successful and marginally funny. Now, not so much, and he kind of just doesn't seem interested maybe, and maybe he doesn't get up for it because he's not the star. He knows it's kind of just a small role that he's filling in on. But Mick Foley, he wasn't bad, he wasn't great, but Mark Henry, who did get a lot more of the dialogue and stuff, and that's largely because him and him and Show are such good friends and have a good interpersonal chemistry that came through in the show. They chose him for that, and they made the right choice.
One of the subplots throughout the whole season is Cassie and her real estate gig. There's a house. It may or may not be haunted, but it becomes a running gag that she's trying to sell this thing, first as part of a larger firm, then on her own, as she ends up getting fired for cutting corners. And involved in this is her assistant, who is played by Asif Ali. He is Bennett. And first he's the assistant, but then he sells her out, and he ends up getting promoted in his dad's company, and then later on he's fired, and he ends up having to work for Cassie again, and there's a gag with him, like blackmailing the daughters and all kinds of nonsense stuff. Just any thoughts on the haunted house bits, any of the real estate stuff, Bennett?
The shyster character, the Indian fella, they could have taken or leaving him. Seen him before, we'll see him again. Mm-hmm. Cassie's struggle with not telling people that somebody died in the house, and how she tries to balance it is pretty good. It's just a funny little subplot. The stuff where they had Show interact at the house, that was funny because he got to do some physical comedy, and I think he's very good at that. And I'm glad they didn't rely on it through the entirety of the show because it would have got old quick. Yeah. And he's better than that.
Yeah, we don't need the Show falling through the house every episode. So, lastly, and then I think we'll wrap up. I mean, there's only 8 episodes here. I loved the last 2 episodes where he decides he's going to go back on the road, and they're kind of preparing for that. And he gets a bump on the head at the Performance Center, and they do the "It's a Wonderful Life," and he sees. And again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, this really touched a chord for me, and it really resonated because, you see that if he hadn't come off the road, he would not have been as close as he is now with Lola. He had an influence on Mandy in that he gave her confidence to stand up for herself and fight for what she believes in, and this is why she's running for president, which she would not have done. I think they showed her writing speeches for Taylor Swift instead of giving speeches. We didn't talk about this, but they recognize through testing that JJ is gifted. And so, she, of course, is not comfortable with the idea of being in a gifted class. But, Show gives her confidence and works with her and is a big part of her life. And so, in the alternate universe where he's on the road, she's in detention because, she never goes to the gifted class. And lastly, you have Cassie, who is not able to do more with her career in the absence of Show being home, so she's Bennett's assistant, and he's abusive. And I loved all of that. And, I got kind of emotional with that episode, short as it was. I really, really liked it, and I thought it was a great way to end the season. So those 2 episodes I thought were great. The cruise one was really funny and definitely resonated with me because I've definitely been in a position where I have tried my level best to be romantic. Just not. This might shock people, but romance doesn't come naturally to me. I'm not that kind of guy. But I have tried my level best, and you're in a situation where you're just not connecting. Nothing is working. That's how frustrating that could be. Plus, the wrestlers in it were funny. So that all worked. The stuff with the escape room and the boyfriend and everything. If anything got cringy, it was probably that. But they kept it low key enough to where I could enjoy it without having to fast forward. And that's it. Like I said, it's a rough start. Many shows are, but I think it's worth sitting through 8. It's a short watch. It's worth getting through the 8 episodes, and I'm looking forward to a second season. Pat, which episodes did you like? Which did you struggle with? And give me your final thoughts.
The big surprise, the cruise is definitely the high point. The big party, the name of that episode. The big surprise, and big decision, 2-parter, really well done. Enjoyed those as well. Lesser episodes, probably the big brain, where you find out they recommend JJ to the gifted class, and then you get into the whole Mandy versus Taylor Swift issue. Wasn't a huge fan of that.
That's also the one where Lola and Cassie bond.
Yeah, which is the better plot of the 2, but still not the strongest. And the one with the guy from Queer Eye, where Lola has her boyfriend, that bordered on cringy at times.
Yeah, that's the one. So it's that one that follows Cassie getting fired, and so it's actually really funny because again, it's one of those where it kind of takes the woman down a notch. You get to see her at her worst, and she's going through these various stages of grief, having lost her job. I don't know. I just don't feel like that's something you see a lot on TV because so much of it is agenda driven, and women have to be perfect, and you can't see them vulnerable, or if they are vulnerable, it's because the men in their life are terrible and they've made them that way, that sort of thing. It was fun to just see this character who, with the loss of her job, just completely unglued. And, and the family's having to rally around her to pick her back up again. And Show, in some deft writing, actually is the only smart one, the only one with any sense, that says, hey, let her go through these stages. She'll be fine. She has to go through her process. And and the daughters are like, no, this can't possibly be the right thing, and it turns out that it is the right thing. Which, again, I have to give it to the writers for, not making the man just a large talking side of beef.
Did you just say large talking side of beef?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Your final thoughts, sir?
A shockingly fun entry into the sitcom world. If I'm giving it a grade of between 0 to 5 stars, I'd probably give it 3.5 right now. And I think there's potential for more. But again, I think the casting is very strong. I think the writing's been good and not repetitive. And again, I would say that the best part of the show itself is in fact the Big Show. I think he's really good at not just physical comedy, but his delivery is there, his timing is there. He plays an extension of himself, which kind of shows that he's probably a pretty decent guy in real life and pretty understanding. But I just think he did a tremendous job here. I think most people did, but I have to call him out specifically because I think the majority of the show is dependent on what he does, and he really takes what they give him and does it very well.
All right, Pat, I want to thank you for hanging out with me tonight. This was your pitch. You were like, oh my God, we have to do this. And of course, I am a whore for content, so I say yes to just about everything. But I have to say, I talked about this with Comer and David when we talked Agresco. And, I'm always willing to do a show that somebody else pitches. And sometimes it works out well, and you guys pick some really fun stuff that I might not have watched of my own volition, and I end up enjoying. And this was one of them. So thank you, Pat.
Was my pleasure.
All right. The next time you're going to hear Pat on here, unless he jumps up on a Metal Hammer of Doom at some point, May 11th, we will be doing Chapter 7 of our walkthrough boxing heavyweight history. We'll be looking at the WBA Heavyweight Elimination Tournament just after Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali gave up the title. We will also be on May 21st. Now, the last Dark Side of the Ring, I believe, is May 19th. 2 days later, Pat's going to join me again, and we're going to talk Dark Side of the Ring Season 2. We might touch on Season 1, because we never really got a chance to talk about it. We didn't do a TV party for it at the time. But we're mostly going to focus on the glory that has been Dark Side of the Ring Season 2.
Boy, Season 2 kicked off with a bang.
Yeah, it did. I haven't watched the Snuka episode yet, but so far the Benoit stuff was a bit emotional. The New Jack episode was a lot of fun, and the Brawl for All, I could not wait for the Brawl for All episode. A little disappointing. I wish they had touched on some things that they didn't touch on, but overall it was fun to walk back through that shit show.
Yeah, not a fan of the Brawl for All episode, but the Snuka episode more than makes up for it, FYI.
Okay, well, I'm probably going to watch that next before I go to sleep. So that wraps it up for Pat for the month of May and for April. Pat?
Unless you do a watch-along of the seminal 1992 classic Gladiator with myself and Teasley at some point.
I'm open to the idea. We'll see. My schedule has changed again. I have a little bit more time off than I used to. On the other hand, I've got these people around here. I got these people, Pat. I got these rats. Vince, I got these rats. Remember that when that was a thing?
I do.
So yeah, maybe if life resumes some degree of normalcy and I have some privacy back, we might be able to fit that in somewhere. All right, are you recording with anybody else these days? Are you doing any other podcasts?
Mark, I'm nothing if I'm not loyal.
Fair enough. All right, so then there's no plugs. And so thank you for joining us here on TV Party Tonight. For Pat Mullin, I'm Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.